Today, we'll be talking to Joe and Suze of Human Behaviour Change for Life. If you enjoy this episode, make sure to subscribe to whichever platform you're listening to it on. Subscribing can help us to grow our followers, which then helps us to bring on new speakers to share their knowledge and experience with you for free. So tell me who you are and where you come from. We'll start with you, Joe, and then we'll head over to you, Sue.
Yeah, so my name's Jo White. I'm co-founder and co-director of Human Behaviour Change for Life, and I live in deepest, darkest Norfolk in the UK. I suppose my background has been one of very much kind of originally on the equine side, but I was always passionate about animal welfare across all species and fascinated by human behaviour and other species again. So yeah, I've been on a journey which has been linked, I suppose, throughout my career to behaviour change. So that's got me to where I am now, and in a wiggly way, but yeah, lots of enjoyable moments along that way.
We like squiggly paths.
And I'm Suze Rogers, currently living in the Surrey Hills near Dorking. And handily, I've pretty much got exactly the same as Joe in terms of introduction. So the wiggliness, the many speciesness, and now we're at behaviour change. So just ditto that, really.
It is, I think, after I've had 10 years now in pet health, and I haven't met one individual within the community that hasn't got a very diverse career. And even outside of like their standard work, they'll have like a million projects on the go.
This is the joy of what we do, is that kind of no project is exactly the same. So it's kind of we get to work with some amazing people in a whole variety of things, from the veterinary profession, but also lots of charities and NGOs, policymakers, academia, but people coming from so many different backgrounds, but also all the work on the coalface. So we get to work with people, whether it's pet owners, right through to kind of different elements of looking at farm animal welfare and the trade, and so much more. So it keeps life very interesting and very rich.
And I think that is great what you guys are doing, because there's the transfer when we're talking about behaviours, where that you guys have, you've come from animal specific, and then now you've moved through into human, and a lot of what we understand and just know for animals, we don't often stop to think how relevant they can also be for ourselves in the different packs that we work and live in. I mean, we've worked with Inside Minds and Becky from Inside Minds, and often talks about like the psychology of client interaction and the client experience, and how elements like senses such as like the smell of a reception, or the sound of a doorbell, or that creaky like first floorboard as you come into reception, can really impact the way clients behave or perceive a clinic. But how can the way that we behave as a team or a team leader really impact our working environments and the psychology of those that we're working with?
So I think there's a really interesting study that was done in motivational interviewing world that showed the importance of everyone working as a team, and how every single part of that works as a system. And so in one experiment, they showed they had a waiting room with people waiting to go and have their appointment with the counsellor. And in that waiting room, for some people, they had a very standard, here's a chair, wait for your waiting room, and then they go in. And for other people, they took a bit more care and a bit more time and had an initial conversation. And the report and the findings was really interesting, because they found that the ones who had that little bit more care taken, irrespective of what happened in the consulting room after that, they were the ones that had the best outcomes. And I think that's so important, because it shows the role of that waiting room experience, the booking experience on the appointment. As you say, all those little elements all make a difference, and just appreciating that it's the whole package of that client journey, to use kind of marketing speak, but it's every single part of that plays a really important role. And if you take one part out, and then you're likely to not get the outcomes you want. And so in terms of culture, that's really important, valuing every person in their role in the team in a very real way, and in the way because the client is the one facing them. And so to sort of develop that culture, we'll come to this later, but there's very key principles that can be applied, such as, not making assumptions about why someone's doing something, but asking them, or why someone's turned up in the vets, or why they're late, asking them. And also the other key thing in our work is about that knowledge is often not the key that's needed. So because often it's not the fact that they don't know something, it's that you haven't got the support or the skills around that. And we're often focused on, if only we just want to tell them, what to do. And we know that isn't the way that things work in people's brains. So I think those two things are a good starting point to develop that culture of not making assumptions, valuing everyone on the team and thinking of their role in the system, and not focusing on, we just need to tell people stuff to make them do it. We know that there's a lot more to it than that, and that's what really brought Joe and I to looking at the science of human behaviour change.
Yeah, it makes sense. Happy teams create happy outcomes, and I think that's probably why in veterinary in particular you see a lot of burnout, because there is a lot of focus over, Joe, like the client experience, making sure that clients aren't overly impacted in a negative way. But I guess also there is kind of the direction that you're talking about. They're always coming at things with positive intent. I don't know. Sometimes I think it might even be a British cultural thing. Do you know, we assume people are always doing stuff for the wrong reason. But with so many studies, why do you think that changes of behaviour can be so difficult, even if people want to change? What is the biggest blocker for most individuals and most teams?
I mean, that's such an interesting, big question in terms, I suppose it's that kind of research that's been going on for so many years, as you mentioned. But there's so much there that we need to take into account. And I suppose when we're thinking about ourselves as humans, we need to take into account our evolutionary history. So, we're talking about a long time that we've been kind of developing these behaviours. And I think sometimes we forget how much of those elements are wired into us, and we've got to take that into account. We've also got kind of the lifelong journey that we've been on. So we're developing behaviours right from within the womb. So from that point of view, there's layers and layers of behaviours that we develop throughout our lifetime. And if you think that this research that shows that 40 to 45% of those behaviours are habitual. So those are the really strong behaviours that are kind of in place, that we do every day automatically. So then when we're thinking about behaviour change, it can be really challenging because actually we've got all these layers of behaviour already in place that might be tied to our values, our beliefs, our identity as to who we are. And they also, you mentioned, you're talking about the kind of culture that we live in and the social norms around that. A lot of these behaviours are kind of being promoted by the society we're living in. So when you put all of those sort of ingredients together, it can be really, really challenging. Even if people feel, motivated, they feel the kind of real reason, they know the reasons that they want to change, they've got everything in place, but still, it's kind of really tricky. And even thinking about sort of some of the simple things that we might want to do. I always think exercise comes up so often, probably because I'm always trying to do more exercise and feel like I'm constantly failing at doing more exercise. But the idea of going for a run, I've been thinking about going for. I did run. I had a bit of an accident, stopped running, and then I've been intending to go for that, start running again. So it is challenging, but it's sort of how we tackle that and how we use behavioural science in practice to design it to help support people. So I think it can be hard, but we can use the science to make things easier as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, I think quite often if the negative routines are, like you say, habitual, I guess people feel more comfortable in them. They know how to navigate them. And so maybe a lot of what people need to do is it's maybe more of a focus on the unlearning rather than the learning. It's not that they don't know what to do, but they need to maybe unlearn the pieces of the puzzle that are blocking them from moving on. Joe, what do you think is the biggest myth when it comes to motivation and discipline? Like, what do you think is the real? You spoke about wanting to go for a run and kind of like, you know, that's what you've got to do. Is it that people are just lazy? That's why they don't want to move on. What are the biggest myths around motivation and discipline?
I think people just expect motivation to just happen, and they think that, you know, okay, I just should be motivated. But don't take into account that motivation is kind of like, it requires effort, it requires energy, and when we've got all of these other pulls on our time, life can feel kind of really stretched. So when we're sort of thinking about it from that perspective of motivation, we need to be a little bit kinder on ourselves. And again, it goes back to how we design interventions to take that into account. So to take into account that we're gonna trip up, we're gonna find it difficult, because if we do that, then we can use those learning opportunities to actually ensure that we have enough motivation to go for that run. We can design it so it's really, really easy to do, and it can be something that actually helps us get across that intention gap towards behaviour. There's just a couple of other points I wanted to kind of make, because I think this is such a really interesting question around motivation, because there's often so much focus placed on motivation, and it's obviously critical. It's a really important aspect, but there can also be other elements that we can take into account. So if we look at kind of the setup, what people know, do they have the skills? You know, thinking about working with clients in a vet practice, you know, do the people that we're working with have the skills to do certain things? You know, do they have the skills to give the cat the pill, for example? But also, do they have the resources in place? Do they have the equipment? Do they have the time? Do they have the money? Do they have the social support? Because if we have all of those things in place, that can also help alleviate and make it easier to be motivated as well. So it's looking at things in a bigger picture and not just thinking, oh God, we need to motivate people. We do need to motivate people, but we also need to make sure that we've enabled them to do something. So lots there. Motivation we could talk about forever.
We see it a lot in tech, you know, that there'll maybe be an operational breakdown of what's needed for the team. So maybe like a better PMS system, maybe a better appointment booking system, and all those things will be provided for the team. But the tech is almost kind of like thrown over the fence, and then the leaders leg it, and then they wonder why it's not implemented. But the support's not been put there to show people how to use it, to show people why they would want to use it, or to, like you say, embed it into the culture and the community, so the whole team is using it. Suze, one of the things that I've noticed is that in a highly digital, remote world, you guys are really focused in on human interactions and kind of bringing communities together and bringing people together in a shared experience. So I wonder if you could tell me a bit more about HBC Fest, because that is a really human experience, you know, that happens and occurs in the real world.
Yeah, so over the years, we've organised many events, and the first big conference we had with the very long name, the first international conference for human behaviour change for animal welfare, which sold out in Dorking back in 2016. That was a traditional academic conference, and we love those as a place for them. We still made it very innovative. We had like a photo exhibition, and we had drumming, we had all sorts of things. Essentially, though, there's still that sort of top down, the person speaks, everyone listens, and you're sat down for quite a long time. And we've done many events like that in partnership with academia, especially. So we wanted to just get out there. We wanted to sort of walk the walk a little bit more about what we know about behaviour science, what we know about how people learn, what we know about what creates retention, and that importance of skills, not just knowledge. And so we wanted to bring all those together into a learning experience. And so that's where the idea of HBC Fest was born. So it's held in somewhere called Big Sky Hideaway in Lincolnshire in the UK. It's a beautiful sort of natural-based oasis in Lincolnshire flat monoculture. But you know, they've rewilded the site. It's beautiful. There's yurts, there's a converted bus, there's a beautiful barn where we have some of the bigger talks. And so we're immersing ourselves in nature. We're giving people the opportunity to go and breathe outside. Some of the sessions are outside or in the woods under covering. We've gone low tech to get away from death by PowerPoint, even exciting PowerPoints. You know, we wanted to sort of put them aside. And we've really embraced and had our speakers embrace that idea of a bit more connection, of learning, of skills, not just listening, of having a bit more time through workshops to go a little bit more deeper into subjects rather than kind of being hit at them, you know, and then they're coming at you and then you've got ideas and then you lose. We're trying to follow that through all the way through to, as Joe said, to bridge that intention behavior gap so we can fill that a bit. So really it brings together, us walking the walk and applying the knowledge of human behaviour change. We're not leaving online behind. So we have an international audience and we are doing an international conference as well in October where it's online, some live, some pre-recorded, but still we're going to bring the human element as much as you can online. So we are going to have movement sessions. We're not going to be expecting everyone to sit down. We're going to be encouraging some movement, some interaction, some other innovative, exciting elements even to the online space.
It's really refreshing. It's lovely to see how passionate you are about human connection, and the impact that it can have. People they want that continued learning, so they want access to new information, to new studies. They want access to each other. But I think having that mix of in person and remote is wonderful. Who is HBC Fest open to? Like who can buy tickets to attend?
If you're human, you can buy a ticket. Due to the other wildlife, we can't have other species of guests. But yes, it's really open to any change makers at sort of any level. So if you're, working for yourself, or you're trying to get a little bit more perhaps impactful, a lot of the training we do as vets, as animal welfare professionals, is rightly aimed at the animal and understanding animal behaviour. But of course, there's always a person involved in that. So to make change for the animals, you need to go through the person. And that's often in terms of skilled learning. What we don't learn when we're doing animal behaviour or veterinary courses, we learn a little bit about client compliance, but not maybe have that space to go a little bit deeper, to reflect on what works and what doesn't work. And so, yes, it's very relevant for the veterinary profession, but also anyone who has to work with humans to try to get them to do things or not do things. It's really relevant for us all.
Okay, so if you're a local vet and you're good friends with another local business owner, you both could come along and find stuff to learn. Wonderful. When we look at the media currently and kind of perceptions around vets, there's a very kind of there's a big discrepancy to what like the media pants and what is the real true experience. What's been your kind of like feedback? Because vet teams are intelligent, they're caring, they're obviously they've come into this field because they have a high level of empathy. They're highly trained. So is there a resistance to change, or is there a lack of support? What would you say, Joe?
I think it's complex, and I think things you've just touched on there kind of really evidence that. And we'd always I'm going to be slightly tricky with this one, because I always say we'd always kind of seek to understand, because it's like, actually, if people are showing resistance, there's usually a reason as to why that's happening. And is it resistance? Is it really kind of actively they don't want to do something, or is there another story behind it? So with all of these things, it's about that whole thing of unpacking and hearing that the individuals or the team's story as to why things might be challenging. I mean, as you've outlined, we've got this sort of situation in the veterinary environment at the moment where it's really challenging. So, in vets' day-to-day lives, they're dealing with emergencies. They might be dealing with tricky situations with clients, because they're dealing with other people's emotions as well as their own emotions. So there's all these things competing for their time, their own intellectual energy and property, and their own intellectual capacity. that are all sort of challenging that situation, and that also result in stress. It can create quite a stressful situation. And often it's because of that kind of stressful situation, and it just feels like yet another thing to do on top of another thing to do. That's what can then appear to be resistance. And actually, if people had that moment to breathe, to kind of really understand what's going on and why, then actually when you start to understand kind of the barriers as to why, you can kind of think, well, no, there's opportunities. There's usually always opportunities to look at change. We often talk also about creating a space for people to move into. So by people understanding and being part of that, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of involving people, but people being part of the change themselves and feeling that they really understand why it's happening, you start to melt away kind of what can be perceived as resistance, and people can move into a space. Whereas if it's a sort of finger pointing, telling people you need to do this because we just need to do this, you can straight away see people's backs coming up. So it's that kind of whole thing around involving people. And just a kind of final comment on this is it's also, I mean, there's so much more I could say, but it's also back to what being tied up in people's identity. So if we see a situation where we feel very strongly about something, and as you say, they're a caring profession, and maybe they don't necessarily understand kind of the reasons behind it. So it's really making sure that people truly understand if there's a business case for making a change, that people are involved in that, so they understand. Because actually, you know, with that kind of understanding, people are more likely to kind of move with a change. But it's without that, you know, it's not kind of taking into account you've got a caring profession that want to do the best. So it's working with them as much as anything. So much more we could say about that, though.
Do you think generally there is a lack of a kind of safe space for people to voice their opinions? Do you think there needs to be kind of more of a platform for people to voice how they feel, and maybe even become connected in a shared experience? Do you think that's one of the things that doesn't happen enough, is that maybe in the teams themselves you get the divide, you know, where it's kind of like us and them between the veterinary teams and the client, but then it's also us and them between the team and the leaders?
I think that safe space is so important, and people need to feel that they can share what's worked but what hasn't as well. And I think in society more generally, people have become quite worried about speaking out and kind of what might happen if they said something, and you know, and what's okay to say and what isn't okay to say. So I think it's really, really important to create a safe space that people can feel that they can share things honestly in a supported way. And it goes back, you know, we talked about being social animals. As a species, we do need that interaction. We need to kind of feel heard. We need to feel seen, but we need to feel safe to do that. And trust is massively important. So having a culture of trust throughout a practice for all members of that veterinary practice is so important.
And so we've spoken about the benefits of a business, you know, that happy teams create happy outcomes, you know, happy clients have a longer lifetime value for a business. But how can practice managers and team leaders introduce change without triggering defensiveness? You know, it might, maybe in the past it seemed less of a reason to do it, but it's clear now that businesses perform well when they have good teams. But how can we get the buy-in from the team? How can a team leader that really wants to implement change on their own get a buy-in from the team without kind of getting people's backs up?
Yeah, and that's a good question. There's lots of practice managers that are under so much pressure to have those outcomes, to change things, to bring things around. I think that pressure placed on individuals sometimes doesn't help to create the culture that we're looking for and that we've talked already about. And so I think practice managers can start to not sort of, it's a team effort to solve this, and really involving the team and not taking all upon yourself to solve everything. I think that's a good start. So that's sort of true, not just consultation, not just saying, you know, what do you think? But true involvement and co-creation and curiosity around what's out there and what could happen to make a change is part of the crux of it, really, just away from that sort of individualistic thinking and thinking that we're all in this together. You know, you've all got ideas, we've all got experiences. And often the managers are kind of making inferences or thinking they must do that because, or are they doing that because of this? But did we ask them, you know, did we really go and ask those questions and show that curiosity about where the real barriers are? Because it's very easy to have perceived barriers about other people, other people's work and what they're doing and why they're doing it. But we need to really, truly engage. And I think I love the word curiosity, because I think that feeling of like, you know, and tell me, you know, what's going on and what do you think? And it seems very genuine. And if you do things through a curious lens, then you've got that authenticity, that setup in place for truly giving people a voice, the space we've talked about. And it doesn't feel so kind of diggy or passive aggressive of, you know, I've noticed this, why are you doing that? It feels a bit more honest and genuine. So I think that in a you know, a really short answer would be being genuinely curious, genuinely involving people, trying to co-create solutions. There's a long-term and a short-term element there, isn't there? Because in the long term, you're trying to build this culture of co-creation, of sharing, of support. But in the short term, as you say, you might get that sort of eye-rolling response, like, oh, another thing we're going to be asked about, or another thing we're going to have to do. And so there's a slightly different answer for the short term as well. But I think in the short term, again, it's about being honest and curious and asking those questions, and doing that from a position not of I'm the senior person and I'm going to tell you or I'm going to solve it for you, but in a slightly more genuine way. And then we can balance that short-term needs with the long-term needs, because there might be short-term changes that you have to make and that you have to say that people aren't going to like. But if we appreciate that and mention that and frame it within this longer term kind of co-creation thing, that can really help. So people can go, okay, this is this week's thing that I'm going to have to do, but now I understand where it's going. I can see where we're going with this and where we're working together. And so that's how we can kind of do the balance between that long-term and short-term shifts that are needed.
Yeah, so small digestible steps, I guess. And I kind of, for me, it's really similar to my parenting journey. Like I think the biggest piece of advice I had was given as a parent was to leave your ego at the door, because there's so many times, you know, when you've got a million things that you're trying to do. So you're thinking, okay, so I've got that project in for work and I've got a deadline that's by the end of today, but the kids need to get their shoes on. We've got 10 minutes to get out of the door and we need to get to school because otherwise we're going to get another late mark. And then you get that little bit of resistance from the kids, and you kind of you feel the pushback. But actually, you know, if you stop for a second and realize there is no conflict there. They don't want to war with you, but maybe they're also feeling the stress as you're walking through and doing things robotically. They're running around behind you, also trying to keep up with you. You know, and so sometimes, yeah, we spoke about like positive intent. But I think also sometimes it's maybe taking a step back and realizing it's not personal, and maybe you play a bigger part than you realize. Are there any for somebody that really is kind of desperate to implement change, but they understand like all these pressures, are there any kind of like small behavior hacks that, you know, like tips for things that they can embed? So is it just a matter of allowing everybody to ask questions and not taking offense when people question what you do, or are there small like changes that you can add into the day that maybe can influence people like passively without realizing?
Totally. And I think sort of building on what Suze was saying around sort of curiosity, I think that's such an important opportunity there. So just very simple, but something we're all pretty bad at doing, which is active listening. So that whole thing of like really listening to what someone said. So when you're kind of having that moment, you know, it's a quick chat while the kettle's boiling or something like that, is actually thinking, right, am I really listening to what my colleague is telling me? And maybe taking a moment to kind of reflect back what you're hearing, so that person feels generally seen and heard. And that can be incredibly powerful. It's just a sort of simple thing, but it does take a little bit of practice, in the sense of when you've got all those things whizzing around your brain, thinking, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, but just taking a breath and actually thinking, right, am I listening properly to this person? That can build rapport, it can really engage people, and it can just have that kind of moment of being seen. And I suppose another couple of things were around the kind of small wins, because I think sometimes we think, oh God, we do need to make time to celebrate, but we're not always the best at doing that. But actually, we should be doing that throughout the day. Is that kind of the small wins are sometimes the really critical points. They're the things that kind of everything else can hang off. So if we take that kind of moment to recognize something, to recognize the receptionist who's dealt with a tricky client, the vet nurse who's picked up on something that may have kind of caused an issue. They caught something in practice that actually meant that something could be addressed before it became too late. All of those things, they're kind of like moments. Quite often they're just little simple moments in time, but by recognizing them and kind of actually shining a little bit of a light on that in the moment, it's very, very powerful, because people, again, it's that whole thing of people being seen, feeling like they're appreciated. And it's, can just be a few words, also the little check-ins, how are you doing? How's it going? Or, that was a challenging conversation. You dealt with that really well, but, how are you feeling about that? Just actually asking someone how they feel can make them feel like cared for. And, in the end, we talked about a caring profession, and people do care about each other, but sometimes the rush can stop those sorts of things from happening. So the sort of small things that we can do along the way that have really powerful outcomes as well.
Yeah, that maybe feel like fleeting moments. They might not actually feel like, in the bigger scale of things, they might not even be moments that you remember yourself. But I guess if you are showing somebody that you're listening, and especially at the right time, the impact that it can have on that person is epic. So, Jo, do you think morale plays a big part in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that you can see it within the culture of a place. You can feel it when you walk in somewhere, if morale is high or not. We talk a lot in sort of behavioral science about things like emotional contagion. So if you have a sort of situation where you can walk into a room and you feel like people are their morale is flat on the floor, you can feel it in their emotions. It's so important in terms of the kind of feeling of how we can approach change. We need kind of a situation where people are feeling supported in order to increase that morale. People need to be heard, they need to be seen, they need to be respected as well for the things that they're doing. Because with that, we can then, this also ties back into all of the other things that we've been talking about as well, around things like motivation, for example. If morale is as flat as a pancake, you're not going to get strong motivation to do additional requests. Whereas if we can uplift, we can support people, they can feel seen, they can feel engaged in the process. Suze was talking about co-creation. They can feel part of that process of change, and that lifts morale because people have a stake in something. They feel that they're part of that change, and it's really powerful.
So it's not just about turning up to work that's nice and sparkly and got brand new equipment. It does matter how embedded in that clinic or in that team the individual feels.
Yeah, I think it's feeling like they've got a stake in what's being the decisions that are being made. And I think yes, the sparkly clinic might feel like environment is also really important. So we don't want to kind of downplay that. It's not necessarily the sparkly equipment, but how the environment is designed. So there's certain things we can take from that as well. But actually, if people don't feel that they're really valued, you're starting in a bad place. So that kind of opportunity for people to turn up, to feel like they're being listened to feel part of a team. Back to what Suze was saying about that kind of team, we can then build upon something, because actually people are going to give more. This is all about intrinsic motivation, because people feel intrinsically, emotionally part of something that they care about. And that's very, very powerful for a team.
And so what does leadership behaviour play in shaping culture unintentionally? Because Jo, you briefly touched there on the fact that it isn't just about feeling listened to. There is also elements of like pride. How can a team leader or a practice manager embed that and use that to shape the entire culture of their team?
I think Jo's given some nice examples already of that kind of cheerleading talk, but not too cheesy because we are English. But people need to see it being modelled. They need to see it being acted out in real life. People need to walk the walk and talk the talk, because otherwise you have inauthentic feelings, and that doesn't help at all. So we need to role model it. We need to be doing what we're saying we're doing. We need to be expecting the same as we expect of others, and not having those double standards. Cultures can change quite quickly, and this can be counterintuitive, because we're used to thinking about the big things, education and legislation and culture, as being really stagnant and unable to change. But actually, organizational culture can change really quickly. Yeah. I mean, just a very quick personal experience. I remember going from a manager in a very big organization who was let people have their autonomy, really respected your work, to someone who took much more of a closer approach. And pretty much overnight, under the first manager, people were going all out. They were working many more hours than they needed to. Their passion was in it. They were doing extra all the time. And then as soon as it became micromanaged, a lot of that dropped off. There was a lot more minimalism in the I'll just do what's needed. And so culture, including culture of an organization, can change quickly. It can be slow, but it can be quick. And I'm sure we've all got examples of where that's happened. So again, it goes back to that support, that safe place, that autonomy, and really being authentic and walking the walk and talking the talk, and self-reflecting. And I think often in the busyness and the crazy lengths of to-do lists, we don't take the time out to do that reflective practice. And we can reflect individually and encourage ourselves and build that in as a habit in our day-to-day work. And we can also reflect as a group and encourage that. And it can be quite structured. That structured reflection can be important in instilling that kind of behavior in people. So I think that leadership from above, we're creating that reflection and reflective practice, is one really key way.
Yeah, because we have put a lot of emphasis on team leaders and those managing the practice, but I can imagine a big shift can also come from team leader burnout and resentment that can happen. Jo, if you do feel like you're putting your all in, but like you say, if you are a team leader or you're managing a practice which is part of a bigger structure, there can be movements that come in that can completely disrupt all the work that you're doing. What ownership do you think that team members can also take to support positive change, the change that they want, and to also influence their leaders, so that you kind of get a match between the two?
I think that comes down to partly healthy feedback systems as well. And again, that authenticity of we're not just asking you so that we can railroad you or ignore it or just write it down. It goes back to authenticity all the time, because it's so often lacking. And that's why I've kind of picked it up as a bit of a theme for some of these questions. But that genuine curiosity, that genuine asking and checking in on people, and building that through what you do yourself is really key. And also having that's not failure if you're struggling. And I think that's another really key thing. And it's not all upon your shoulders. So for managers and for team leaders, often there's the weight of the world's on them to solve problems. And by working in a team, we can spread that a little bit in a really helpful, good way. And then we can encourage other people to do the same. So we're not always trying to paper over the cracks. We're not always trying to just report the good because we feel that that's wanted. We're not always trying to think we have to think of all those celebratory things we can do, although that's super important. We're also truly reflecting on what our capacity and the barriers that's working to or against that. And so we can work on it in a shared way. And of course, we're going to have some hierarchy, because that's how the world works and what makes the processes work. Yeah. But within that hierarchy, we can encourage group thinking in a useful way that spreads the load and is supportive and ultimately creates the culture that we're looking for and that we've talked about.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think across most industries, you have a certain level of emotional fatigue and normally it comes at a specific point in the year. It's like the pivotal point of your community or your industry, and you can kind of brace yourself for it. But with vet teams, they're experiencing emotional fatigue on a daily basis, and it's coming in from all different levels, whether that, dealing with sick animals, or the fact that they are working essentially within a business that must grow and make money in order to be able to sustain itself and be there for those sick animals. How do you see the levels of stress within veterinary in particular affecting behaviour? And do you kind of see almost a regular storm that occurs between the stress and the being busy that kind of creates the perfect scenario basically for people reverting back to old habits, back to where they feel more comfortable?
Yeah, we all have these kind of inbuilt scripts inside us that we revert back to when under those periods of stress. So we all have our default behaviors, and I think recognizing what they are can be a first start. So if you take the time, again, it's about a little bit of time, but we can do it when we're driving in the car or in the bath or on the toilet. Just take a little bit of time to think, what are my default behaviors? How I recognize that when I get stressed, I probably talk faster, I get a bit more frustrated with people who are kind of slow and taking their time, and that's more frustrating to me because I want it to be done yesterday. And so by recognizing that, I can have that inbuilt stop think moment. And that's what happens when we get stressed. We go on all these default behaviors, they kind of roll and we can't stop them. Whereas if we can build in those, hang on, stop, this is me being stressed, I'm going to project it by telling someone else to hurry up, that's not useful, rethink, reset, and then go about it in a curious way or in a more productive way. And I think that again goes back to that self-reflection of recognizing that in yourself and recognizing it in other people. There's a really good book called 101 Defenses. It literally lists out 101 ways people defend themselves, all sorts of things, from becoming upset or becoming angry, and lots of other more subtle micro behaviors. And just thumbing through that is a lesson in how to accept people and recognize the effects of stress on people and the effects of defensiveness, because it's really varied. And if we start thinking not just about the behaviors but about the causes, and not just looking at the symptoms of issues, but taking a deeper dive and saying that behavior is how they're responding in that time, but it's not them as a person, that's just part of it. And then I think that can help.
I love that, actually, because I think sometimes we talk about representation. Sometimes you need to see how normal your behaviors are to be able to come to terms with them and be in a position to be able to manage them. And I think, like you say, if the book outlines 101, you could be in a team of, say, 5 to 10 people where you each have a different way that you do that. So do you think, Suze, that is it as important for us to acknowledge that in ourselves as it is to maybe share those default behaviors with our teams, like to explain to somebody? Because if you've got two people that have completely reverse ways of dealing with stress, there is always going to kind of be a little bit of friction if there is an understanding from the other side. Should we share the way that we handle stress with each other?
I think that could be healthy. I mean, obviously we are British and oversharing can be a little bit scary. So we might want to have a little framework around that, or almost facilitate it, or come up with some top tips of how you can be safe, because kind of blurting and oversharing doesn't feel like safety sometimes either. It can be quite exposing and you can feel quite vulnerable. So I think there's ways to do it, but definitely a little bit more conversation, self-reflection, appreciating that we've all got things we go back to, and not judging ourselves by it and not felt judged by it. I think that is super important in creating a cohesive, respectful, safe team and work environment.
And I guess this also relates to people that co-own businesses. I mean, the two. I want to hear both your opinions on this, because you're running a business together. You're both united in your principles and the changes that you want to make, but you are two very different characters. So how can behavior change principles help with difficult conversations when it comes to co-running a business? And if so much of what you preach, how much you preach, you should be actually doing in practice when you're working with each other to be aligned in kind of the goals that you want to achieve.
I think there's enormous amounts. I think the more you learn about behavior change, the more you kind of think, oh, I'm going to draw on that. There's like real opportunities. And running a business, does throw at you lots of challenges along the way. And certainly Suze and I think, apply all sorts of different techniques of behavior change in everything that we do, whether we're talking to each other or whether we're talking to people that we're working with. And all of these are kind of applicable in any context, whether it's kind of in personal life, whether you're a vet nurse, a receptionist. It's all those kind of elements, whether we've covered a few of these things today around active listening being a really good starting point, but also thinking about how we're asking questions. Are we inviting kind of more of an open question where we're seeking out, and it goes back to what we talked about around curiosity and like really finding out kind of what the thoughts and feelings of that person are. So you use that opportunity to find out vital, really valuable information that can inform what you're doing. And we often think about this. Susan and I are forever having like conversations about like how to prepare for things, how we use behavior change in different contexts. And I think about questions, how you ask the questions and what the questions, the contents of them is really, really valuable. You say that, we're very different, but we also, we joke about the fact that we have like one behavior change brain that we use between us. So it's, who's got it today type thing. But that said, it's feeling comfortable when someone has a different perspective. And I think that's actually something we all, I certainly as a human have to work at, that kind of thinking about, okay, that person's got a really different view, but having the curiosity, as we talked about, can really help with that. So if someone's kind of challenging you, and you think about sort of challenging situations with clients, and you're thinking, well, really they just need to do this, why don't they get on with it? Taking that moment to stop, think, take a breath, and just see it as something that's useful information and explore it a bit more. Because sometimes actually it's just that all our kind of mental shortcuts are kicking in, and actually we haven't potentially heard exactly what they're saying, or we haven't spotted the opportunity. And giving ourselves a little bit more time in those conversations can really be powerful, because it gives us that kind of moment to think, okay, actually now I start to see a pathway with which we can move forwards. The more I find out, the more I'm curious, the more I understand about that person. And it goes to, Suze was touching on this, it's that unconditional positive regard for the person in front of you. They have a story, the story might be different, it's going to be different from the one that I've had. Their lived experience is different from mine. How do I find out about it so that I can see the opportunities, I can help them with the barriers, because that's going to have a better outcome for whatever the reason is. But in terms of improving animal welfare and outcomes in veterinary practice, that will really, really help. So
yeah,
question answer.
you were saying before about actively listening, and I guess this would be a good place to practice repeating back what people have said, because I think there's this there's a tendency to believe that having conflicting feelings is a bad thing, and that conflict is only a negative behavior. But actually sometimes you need to have that clash of opinions to be able to find the kind of the perfect answer in between the messy middle of it all.
Yeah, it's the spark. Sometimes it's the spark that kind of makes us think and stop and think, okay, I'm going to have to see this from a different perspective. So actually being challenged can be really healthy and really creative. It can kind of lead to sort of creative solutions. So I think sometimes it's that kind of not feeling like it's an attack, but actually it's an opportunity, and seeing it as the opportunity to maybe be a little bit more creative in the approach that we're taking.
And I think in terms of working together as well, time really helps, because the longer we work together, it's been quite a while now as well, the more you learn about each other, the more you have things to build on. So we know now, it's evidence-based, that in the end we'll get to a better product than we ever would working individually. So I think we learn that through time, and also knowing that we've got the same values. I think there's some more surface level things, being women of a certain age, we can understand each other, we can talk about, menopause brain, and sometimes our conversation would be hilarious to listen in on, because we're like, that person, and we talked to this about, when was it, what was their name, and then the other will go, oh yes, it was, and so we have these really kind of funny conversations because of that shared values, but also shared time in life and shared experiences that we can build on. And I think those shared values really underpin everything, don't they? It's knowing that even if we're disagreeing, it's coming from a place of wanting to do the best we can, the best job we can, be the best we can, look after people the best we can. And so when you have that as an absolute given, everything else kind of works itself out. But that does come with time. And then to get to before you've had that time, it's very much based on your own professional identity. And I think we're both very started. We were very respectful of each other. We were very respected where the other person had come from and was going. And that enabled that platform to develop, where you then create all the evidence, which creates the time. And then it kind of goes in a positive feedback loop of that trust developing. So I think that when it comes to co-running a business, it's that shared values that's normally the start of, you're normally on a good place to start with, because if you're co-running a big business, you've almost by definition got the shared values, and then you can build on that.
Yeah, and I guess change doesn't happen overnight. Like you're saying that although the two of you are a great match, there's also time has been needed for the two of you to be able to merge into kind of the dance that you execute perfectly now. Maybe was a bit kind of like footsteppy in the beginning. People stepping on each other's toes is quite a normal experience to go through in the early days.
And I think that imagery is so wonderful, because it is a dance. The more you kind of work together, the more you get into kind of that flow state of we can finish each other's sentences, we kind of know each other well, but we've also built a trust, as Suze is saying, and that kind of safe space. So we will say to each other if we're not feeling quite on it, or we're sort of feeling like, okay, today I'm just not quite firing on all four cylinders, and how can the other one support? So it means that actually we have this really wonderful sort of relationship where we sort of can pick up and pick up challenges when they emerge, but it always means that we can keep going. We've got a wider team as well, so we work with some absolutely wonderful people who have amazing talents, but also having that wider team and being able to have those conversations with others just brings in those kind of that creativity. It keeps challenging our thought processes. You get different perspectives, and we've actively gone out and designed our business along those sorts of lines, so to keep bringing in fresh perspective, because that's the other thing. We don't want to become stale. We don't want to just sort of stand in one place. So bringing in fresh perspectives from very, very different areas, which was, we're in a wonderful position. We can do that with what we do, because there's so many different elements of human behaviour change, but it's really valuable to kind of have people who challenge your way of thinking and seeing things.
And with the power of hindsight, I'm going to open this up to both of you. We'll go to you, Jo, first, and then to you, Suze. If you could take the power of hindsight now and step back to yourself 10 or even 20 years ago, what one piece of advice would you give yourself?
I'd probably say be a little bit kinder to myself, in the sense of that it's okay to trip up and fall on your face, or make mistakes. Don't need to do it all perfectly straight away. It's okay not to know, because I think all of us are under pressure, especially vets, you're in that position of authority and knowledge. But sometimes, you can say,
I just don't know, I'm going to have to look it up, or that's interesting, let's explore it more. And I think that having the bravery and the trust in yourself to be able to do that in a way that feels still authoritative is a sort of behavior change insight that I apply to my own life as well.
Wonderful. It has been absolutely fantastic having you both on the podcast today. Before we jump, I hear that you are currently in search of a handful of veterinary practices that might be open and interested to get involved with a project of co-design and co-creating some of your training and support elements. Could you, I'll hand it over to you guys to explain a bit more about it and how people can get in contact with you.
Yes, we certainly are. So something that we recognise over some time is that we work with vets in lots of different ways, vets and vet nurses and practice managers. But what we've recognised also is that what we've been talking about today, which is kind of the challenges that the veterinary profession is facing, and actually how human behaviour change science in practice can really, really help support the veterinary profession. What we're looking at is how we can design some skills-based training that will support vets in practice. And we are at this moment in time looking for practices, it doesn't have to be just practices. It can also be individuals working within a practice. And again, this is back to the team approach. We want people right across, from vets to vet nurses to practice managers to receptionists, people who are directly or indirectly involved.
Humans.
Yeah, humans. It's always about the humans. To help with co-creating the training, but also we're looking for practices who might be up for being part of that process, but also testing it. So being part of the co-creation, but then going forwards and actually being involved in the testing and the feedback on that. So it's that kind of living, breathing human behaviour change in action, while hopefully sort of also getting some benefits out of the application of behaviour change as well. So if anyone's interested, please do reach out. They can contact us. They can email. So joe@hbcforlife.org would be fantastic, because we'd like to hear from people and we want to keep this moving. We've already got a few people involved at the moment, and we've had some fantastic feedback already about the opportunities and the potential for doing this. So please do reach out.
Wonderful. And if people want to go and have a nosy at what you're doing, maybe find a bit more out about HBC Fest, are there any particular links that they should follow? Can they find you on LinkedIn, your website? Can you give me a bit more of where people can stalk you a little bit after this?
We're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. Haven't quite mastered the other ones. So LinkedIn and Facebook are the main places to find us. And we have a website, HBC for Life, as in hbcforlife.org, has lots of information on it as well. But just email us, get in touch. We're always happy to signpost and to geek out on this kind of stuff, because we love it, and we won't turn down an opportunity to talk about behaviour change.
Brilliant. I'll make sure to add in some links as well in the communications when we send all this out. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful having you on.
Thank you so much for having us.